Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before I continue where I left off with the Arvizos, Mr. Salas, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about one involving the wine cellar. At some time during your occupation as the house manager, was there a safe that was put in to keep some of the keys to various places, including the wine cellar?
Yes, there was.
And where was that safe put in?
It was inside the house in what we call the maid's room.
When was that safe put in?
It was during the time that we noticed the kids were having access to alcohol.
The Los Olivos boys?
That is correct.
And can you help me out with the time frame in terms of what were 2002 or 2003?
2003.
2003?
Yes.
You said that it was October of 2002 when the problem occurred with the Los Olivos boys.
Yes, but we didn't took action until after that. It took us a while to put the key away.
Have you previously told detectives that it was around December of 2002 that the safe was put in?
I must have said that. I mean, I could be wrong.
Do you have a clear recollection of exactly when the safe went in?
I don't know.
Do you recall that the safe was there when the Arvizos were there?
Yes, it was in the safe.
All right. And the wine cellar key, was it kept in that safe?
That is correct.
All right. So when you took the Arvizos from Neverland, what car did you use?
I used the Rolls-Royce.
And who was it that decided to use that particular car? Whose decision was that?
It was my decision.
Had you previously done some driving for Mr. Jackson? I know you previously testified you did the limo drive to Neverland. But other than that, had you previously done some driving for Mr. Jackson?
Yes, I did.
And did you previously use that car on occasion?
Yes.
Did you tell anybody that you were taking the Jacksons, or did you tell anybody that you were taking the Arvizos off property?
Yes, I did.
Who did you tell?
I told Mr. Jackson's bodyguard, Chris Carter.
And why did you tell Chris?
Because it was not my decision to take the family off the property without telling somebody.
Okay. Was Dieter on the property at the time?
Yes, he was.
Was Ronald on the property at the time?
No, he wasn't.
Was Frank on the property at the time?
Yes, he was.
Was there a reason you didn't tell Dieter or Frank that you were taking them off the property?
It was late, and the reason I didn't told them, it was because I didn't know who to tell, so I told Chris about the situation.
Okay.
And so?
Did Miss Arvizo express to you, during that period of time, that she was fearful of anything?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
Did Miss Arvizo express concern to you over any particular individuals at Neverland?
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
Yes, she did.
Who was she concerned about?
It was Dieter and Ronald.
Was she concerned about Frank at all?
She didn't really say too much about Frank.
So you drive her off the property. Where did you take her and her children?
Down south, L.A.
Did you take her to a residence?
Yes.
Was it a house or an apartment?
It was a house.
And was it the place? Did she direct you to the location where she wanted to go?
Yes.
Did you get in any trouble for taking the Arvizos off the property?
Yes, I did.
Tell me about that.
Well, the next day, I was told that they weren't supposed to leave the property.
Objection. Hearsay.
I can ask a couple of other questions that will tighten it up, Your Honor.
All right, I'll strike the answer.
And this answer will be offered in furtherance. Who told you you were in trouble?
The first person that told me, it was Frank.
Frank Tyson?
Uh-huh.
And what did Frank tell you?
He told me that they weren't supposed to leave the property. They were supposed to be notified first.
Who was supposed to be notified first?
Him.
Did he tell you how to handle yourself in the future?
Yes, he did.
Objection. Leading.
I'll rephrase.
Sustained.
Did he make any remarks to you concerning the future?
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
If it was a second time, not to do that anymore.
Not to let the Arvizos off the property if they come back?
Objection. Leading.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Stricken.
Did anybody else tell you that you did the wrong thing?
Yes.
Who was that?
Dieter.
What did Dieter tell you?
Same thing.
Objection. Hearsay.
Same purpose.
Overruled. It's admitted for the limited purpose under the conspiracy instruction that I talked to you about earlier. Go ahead.
Tell us what Dieter told you.
He told me the same thing, that next time I should tell them about the situation first.
Did the Arvizos, well, let me back up. When Miss Arvizo was talking to you about her desire to leave the ranch, did you speak English with her?
Yes, I did.
Did you ever speak with her in a different language?
No.
Okay. Are you fluent in Spanish?
Yes, I am.
Do you know if she is?
No, I don't.
Well, let's talk about when they returned to the property. You said a short time after they first left Neverland, the Arvizos returned.
That's correct.
Were you there when that happened?
Yes.
And when they returned to the property, did Mrs. Arvizo ever ask you to transport her off the property on that occasion, on the second visit?
Yes, she.
Objection. Leading. Hearsay.
Also offered to explain conduct.
The objection is overruled, and I'll admit it for the limited purpose of explaining his behavior. Go ahead.
What was your answer?
Yes, I was.
And when did she make that request of you, in relationship to the time that she arrived?
I would say it was about a week when she asked me again.
And did you take her off the property that time?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
Because I was told not to do that anymore.
Now, at some point the Arvizos left Neverland.
Yes, they did.
For the final time. Have you ever seen them since that time?
That was the last time I saw them.
Do you recall when you were first interviewed about the general facts that you've just described for us by law enforcement?
Yes.
And was there anything special about that particular day when you first spoke to law enforcement?
Objection. Vague. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
When you said about special, what do you mean?
Was there anything unusual that happened on that date?
Yes.
That you're aware of?
Yes, it was.
What was it?
That was when the police came over to Mr. Jackson's house.
The day of the search warrant?
The day of the search, yes.
Do you remember what month that was?
It was November.
Okay, so you told the police about this, helping the Arvizos, on the same day as the search warrant was issued, or executed, I should say. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Salas. I have no further questions.
Okay. Cross-examine?
Yes, please, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it Mr. Salas or Salazar?
Salas.
Salas. Okay. My name is Tom Mesereau and I speak for Michael Jackson, okay? We haven't spoken before, right?
I believe we have. Didn't you call me one time or something like that?
I didn't. That was an investigator.
It wasn't you.
Okay. You spoke to one of our investigators named Jesus Castillo, correct?
That is correct.
And you spoke to him around January 9, 2005, right?
Must have been, yes.
Okay. And do you know? Where did that interview take place? Do you know?
Yes. Was it the Holiday Inn, Santa Maria?
Okay. And approximately how long do you remember speaking with our investigator, Jesus Castillo?
It took, I would say, about half an hour.
Okay. And do you remember you told Mr. Castillo that when you told the police that you remembered Gavin and Star sleeping in Mr. Jackson's room, you meant the lower portion of the two-level suite, correct?
That is correct.
You told Mr. Castillo that Mr. Jackson's room has an upstairs portion and a downstairs, correct?
That is correct.
And you told him that you never saw Gavin or Star sleeping in Mr. Jackson's bed located upstairs, right?
I'll object. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
That is correct. I never saw them sleeping in the bed. I saw them out of bed, not sleeping.
Right. The only place you ever saw Gavin or Star sleeping was in the downstairs portion of Mr. Jackson's room, right?
Objection. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
That is correct.
Okay. And you remember many guests of Mr. Jackson sleeping in his room, sometimes upstairs and sometimes downstairs, right?
That is correct. If you're talking about the boys, yes.
Yeah, he had guests come and sleep from time to time.
That is correct.
In that suite, correct?
That is correct.
Sometimes you'd see them upstairs. Sometimes you'd see them downstairs, right?
That is correct.
Okay, now, one time you suspected that Gavin might have been drinking at a dinner table, right?
That is correct.
But you never saw Gavin drinking, right?
That is correct.
And his family used to have dinner at the dinner table, right?
That is correct.
His mother used to have dinner at the dinner table, correct?
Yes.
Now, the prosecutor asked you questions about whether or not children have a lot of freedom at Neverland, right?
Right.
And your answer was basically they do, right?
That is correct.
And so do their parents have freedom at Neverland, correct?
That is correct.
The prosecutor asked you about something along the lines of first-class service. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you said that Mr. Jackson liked to have his guests get high-quality service, right?
That is correct.
But when you said that, you were also including adult guests, correct?
Right.
And when you were there and you saw Janet Arvizo there, she was getting first-class service, true?
Yes, she was.
Do you remember a period of time when Janet Arvizo was there with her former husband, David Arvizo? Do you remember that?
One time, yes.
And they both were entitled to first-class service, correct?
That is correct.
And when Janet came with just her children, she had all the privileges that guests get at Neverland, right?
That is correct.
She was able to enter the main residence, right?
Yes.
She was able to order food when she wanted, correct?
Yes.
She could sit at the dinner table at the main house and have dinner, or lunch, or breakfast, right?
That is correct.
She also was allowed to enter the kitchen and sit at that bar area and order breakfast when she chose, right?
That is correct.
She also ordered room service when she wanted, right?
That is correct.
And do you know which quarters she stayed in?
If I remember, it was on Unit 4.
And that's one of the most beautiful rooms on that property, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's a room where Elizabeth Taylor and Marlon Brando request to stay, or used to request to stay from time to time, correct?
Objection. Relevancy.
Sustained.
Janet was entitled to the same service that guests like Elizabeth Taylor and Marlon Brando would get, correct?
Objection. Relevancy.
Overruled.
Right?
That is correct.
And when you told the jury that the theater would be open day and night, adult guests also were allowed to go into the theater day or night, right?
That is correct.
And when you told the prosecutor that there was some rooms in the theater with beds in them, adults could use those rooms, true?
That is correct.
The prosecutor talked about candy and sodas and food being available at all hours of date. They were also available for adult guests, correct?
That is correct.
And isn't it true that Mr. Jackson wanted his adult guests to have special, classy service, right?
That is correct.
Now, you saw kids at Neverland visiting when Mr. Jackson wasn't there, correct?
That is correct.
And typically, if kids visited Neverland when Mr. Jackson wasn't there, there were rules that were supposed to be followed for safety, as you said, right?
That is correct.
And typically, it was their parents or whatever adults were with them that appeared to be in charge of them, correct?
That is correct.
And you saw busloads of children from various locations visit Neverland from time to time, correct?
That is correct.
And to your knowledge, Mr. Jackson wasn't in charge of all of those busloads of children, was he?
No, he wasn't.
In fact, most of the time when lots of kids would visit Neverland, some other adult appeared to be in charge of those kids, right?
That is correct.
And adults and children would visit Neverland and be given tours of Neverland, right?
That is correct.
Who typically would give those tours?
We assigned different people, employees of Neverland Valley.
And tell the jury how a tour would be conducted when children and adults would visit Neverland.
They were.
Objection. Relevancy. Beyond the scope.
Overruled. Go ahead.
They would arrive at Neverland Valley Ranch, park on the outside parking lot, walk to the train station. And from there, they were picked up either by train or walk, whatever they preferred to do. Okay, take them back to the theater. Enjoy, the petting zoo. They were allowed to visit where they wanted to. I mean, we had a schedule for them and took them everywhere, the property, to show them the place and enjoy the place. And they ended up at the theater and at the park.
And you would schedule lots of tours from time to time, right?
That is correct.
Sometimes you'd have a couple of hundred children visiting with adults, correct?
That is correct. Sometimes more than that.
What's the largest number of kids you remember visiting at one time to Neverland?
I would say about 300 kids.
And did they come with adults who were in charge of them?
Yes.
Okay. And did you arrange tours for these children as well?
Yes. We assigned the personnel to give them a tour, yes.
Okay. And sometimes, if Michael Jackson was on the premises, he would come out and say hello, right?
That is correct.
But he never was in charge of what these kids did, right?
That is correct.
Objection. Vague as to kids.
Overruled. The answer's in. Next question.
Who would prepare the schedule to indicate whether children were coming to Neverland on a particular day?
I believe that came from LA office.
And would it be posted somewhere?
Yes. All Neverland personnel got a schedule of the kids coming to Neverland.
And would you get a schedule typically the day before or that morning?
Normally we got it, 2 days before, a day before, yes.
And as part of your work, you had to look at the future schedule every day, didn't you?
That is correct.
Because almost every day something unusual or special would be going on at Neverland, right?
That is correct.
And how long did you work at Neverland?
The total was 20 years.
During that 20-year period, would it be accurate to say that many thousands of children came through, right?
That is correct.
They came from Los Angeles, right?
That is correct.
They came from Santa Barbara, right?
Right.
They came from foreign countries, right?
That is correct, yes.
Based upon your experience over 20 years, Neverland was a real attraction for children around the world, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And you considered a major part of your responsibility to be making sure that Neverland was kept up properly so that when children from all over the world came, they'd have a good time, right?
That is correct.
Over 20 years, it may have been hundreds of thousands of children you saw visit, right?
That is correct.
Now, the prosecutor asked you about the time Janet Arvizo asked you to drive her to Los Angeles, okay?
Correct.
You told Jesus Castillo, our investigator, that at no time did anyone forcibly keep her at Neverland Ranch, right?
That is correct.
And at no time was she ever locked in her room, right?
Not that I was aware of.
And at no time was she kept at Neverland Ranch against her will, right?
That is exactly what I said, yes.
She called you upset and asked you to take her home and you did so, right?
Yes.
You took her, yourself, in December, is that correct? Do you remember what month you took her yourself in the Rolls-Royce?
It was December or January, somewhere around there. Pretty bad on dates.
And then she came back. What, in less than a week?
I would say in about a couple weeks, thereabout.
She came back, and then, a few weeks later, wanted to leave again, right?
That is correct.
And you arranged transportation for her to leave again, right?
Yes, I had to call a limo.
And that was, as far as you know, the last time you ever saw the Arvizos, correct?
Correct.
When you drove Ms. Arvizo and her children in the Rolls-Royce, she never made any complaints about the way she'd been treated at Neverland, right?
That is correct.
She never said she'd been abused at Neverland, right?
That is correct.
She never said her children had been taken advantage of at Neverland, right?
That is correct.
But she didn't seem to like Dieter or Ronald, right?
That is correct, yes.
And she told you she was concerned about media attention on her family, right?
She mentioned about that, yes.
Her concerns to you were media attention and the fact that she didn't like Dieter, right?
That is correct, yes.
She never complained about anything else, did she?
No.
In fact, she told you she respected and liked Michael Jackson, right?
Yes, she did.
She never complained to you about Michael Jackson at all, did she?
Never.
When you drove her in the Rolls-Royce, she was in the front seat with you, right?
Yes.
Her children were in the back seat, right?
That is correct.
And you and she spoke during that 3-hour trip, right?
She didn't spoke too much, but, yes, she did.
Did you speak to her very much when she used to stay at Neverland?
No.
Okay, and on that trip, excuse me, Janet Arvizo never complained that she was being taken out of the country against her will, did she?
No, she never said anything.
Do you remember when she returned, you think, within the next couple of weeks?
It was in the next couple of weeks, yes.
Do you remember seeing her suddenly show up with her children again?
Yes.
And do you know what time of day that was?
I believe it was afternoon.
Did you talk to her when you saw her return?
Yes, I did.
You never got the impression she was there against her will at that point, did you?
No, I didn't.
The last time Janet and the kids left Neverland, do you know who drove them home?
Yes, I called a limousine service.
So you took her in a Rolls-Royce one time, and the last time it was a limousine service that you arranged, true?
That is correct.
Do you remember any other times that Janet and the children left Neverland?
That was the last time I saw them.
So you're only personally aware of 2 times where they left Neverland, is that right?
Yes.
That you had anything to do with?
That is correct.
Okay, now, the prosecutor asked you about a safe that was brought onto the property to lock keys. Do you remember that?
Uh-huh.
And if you remember, whose idea was it to put a safe where the keys could be locked?
It was the ranch manager idea and my idea.
Did you discuss it with Michael Jackson?
No, we never did.
You just ordered a safe?
We just ordered a safe.
And you put the keys in the safe?
That is correct.
And before that, where were the keys kept?
They were kept in the same room, behind the door to the entry to the room, yes.
Is that the entrance to the wine cellar?
No. That's the entrance to the maid's room.
Okay, but they were hung out in open view, right?
That is correct, yes.
Do you remember Frank Tyson's sister, Marie Nicole?
Yes.
Do you remember her staying at Neverland?
Yes.
Do you remember her walking around the property and playing with Michael Jackson?
Yes, I do.
Was it your impression that the family was close to Michael Jackson?
Yes.
Did you see Frank Tyson's parents visit from time to time?
That is correct, yes.
And do you remember their names?
I don't, sorry.
Did you see Frank Tyson's brothers visit from time to time?
Yes.
Okay, you talked about a combination to Mr. Jackson's room. Remember that?
Yes.
And did you always have that combination?
Yes, I did.
Do you know if anyone else had it, to your knowledge?
Ranch manager.
What about staff who cleaned the room? Did they typically have it?
Yes. We had another guy there that also had it. Know the combination of the room.
And that combination was changed periodically, right?
My time there, we changed it about a couple times.
Okay. Do you remember it being changed because too many people seemed to have it?
We noticed there was so many kids going into the room, so we figured we change the combination, yes.
Do you remember Michael Jackson complaining that Frank was going into his bedroom when Michael was out of town?
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Was it your understanding that Frank could get into that room on occasion?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Do you know whether or not Frank seemed like he could get into Michael's bedroom from time to time?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Did you ever observe Frank in Michael Jackson's bedroom?
Yes.
Did you ever see Marie Nicole in Michael Jackson's bedroom?
Yes.
And again, when I say bedroom, we're talking about 2 levels, right?
That is correct.
It's a rather large area, isn't it?
That is correct, yes.
And on the lower level, people can sit down and enjoy themselves, can't they?
That is correct, yes.
What do you recall there being on the lower level of Michael Jackson's bedroom when you were working there?
I just recall that it was a peaceful area that people can sit and enjoy themselves there. Fireplace or, it was pretty peaceful place to be.
And he would entertain people in the lower portion of his bedroom, correct?
That is correct, yes.
People would get served food there, correct?
That is correct, yes.
People would get served drinks there, right?
That is correct.
And you say there's a fireplace?
There's a fireplace there.
People would sit around the fireplace and chat, correct?
Yes.
And sometimes they did it when Mr. Jackson was there, and sometimes they did it when he wasn't there, right?
Objection. Foundation. Assumes facts.
Overruled. You may answer. Do you want the question read back?
Do you want? I'm sorry.
Answer it?
Yes. Do you want the question read back?
No, I understood the question. Pretty much when Mr. Jackson wasn't there, nobody was allowed to go into his room.
There were times when he let people in, weren't there?
Yes, there was.
And they would have some fun when Mr. Jackson wasn't even there, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, now, approximately what year did you start working at Neverland?
Since the beginning, do you mean?
Yes.
I would say in 1983.
83?
Uh-huh.
So, there was a point in time where your daughter used to visit Neverland, right?
That is correct.
And what is her name?
Sandra.
Sandra used to visit when she was approximately 5 years old, right?
5, 6, yes.
She used to play with Michael Jackson, right?
Yes, that is correct.
He used to give her gifts, right?
That is correct, yes.
Now, normally do people who work at Neverland bring their children there very often?
They have what is called Family Day, yes.
And please tell the jury what Family Day is.
Family Day is a day where it's open for the employees to bring all your family and have access to all the facilities there, yes.
And how often does that happen?
Once a year at least.
And that's a big event at Neverland, right?
That is correct, yes.
And Michael Jackson closes Neverland off for other visits and lets all of the help in their family take over pretty much, right?
Yes, sir.
And it starts in the morning, doesn't it?
Yes.
Goes late into the evening, right?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned a petting zoo before. Please tell the jury what the petting zoo is.
The petting zoo is a place where they have just little animals for kids, where they can go and play with the animals. They have a variety of animals where kids can, pretty safe, go and touch the animals.
And what kind of animals do you have in the petting zoo?
Well, they have llamas. They have deers. They are rabbits. They have pigs, birds. What else do they have? They have lots of animals.
And the petting zoo is primarily designed for kids, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And then you have a larger zoo, right?
That is correct.
And please tell the jury what's in the larger zoo.
Well, that's where you can find the big animals. Like you can find elephants, lions, chimpanzees. You can find llamas and different other animals. Wolves, stuff like that.
You got giraffes, right?
Giraffes.
There's a camel?
Right, exactly.
And typically, at least once a day, the trainers walk 2 elephants through the property, right?
That is correct, yes.
And they walk the elephants through the property, and very often guests, if they follow the rules, can feed them, right?
That is correct, yes.
And Mr. Jackson will pay for bags of donuts and goodies to give to the elephants, right?
That is correct, yes.
Is that a once-a-day affair?
Yes, pretty much once a day.
Okay, it's usually a big thing for kids and their parents, right?
Right.
Now, as part of your duties at Neverland, you often would pay for toys for kids, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And you would be reimbursed, typically, if you spent your own money on toys, right?
That is correct, yes.
You would get a reimbursement check for as much as $11,000 from time to time, right?
That is correct, yes.
And what kind of rules did you follow as far as buying toys for kids is concerned?
Really wasn't any rules. We just went and bought some toys.
But the prosecutor asked you questions about how influential Mr. Jackson was in running affairs. Didn't he give you a lot of flexibility in just going out, buying hundreds of toys, and then just charging him for it?
That is correct, yes.
And where would you go buy those toys?
Toys R Us.
Okay, would you drive there yourself?
Pretty much Mr. Jackson came along or with the kids or some adults, yes.
And Mr. Jackson would from time to time let you drive parents and their children to Toys R Us, right?
That is correct, yes.
And he would tell you to buy them whatever they'd like, right?
That is correct, yes.
You'd spend thousands of dollars on these kids, right?
That is correct, yes.
And that was one of your responsibilities as ranch manager, right?
That is correct, yes.
To try and take care of the children as best you could, right?
Correct, yes.
Now, what are the safety regulations in effect at the zoo, to your knowledge?
Well, there's certain regulations for the zoo, especially with the big animals. Again, for the safety of the guests or kids, yes.
And you have all these amusement rides as well, right?
That is correct, yes.
Please tell the jury what amusements rides you have for the kids and the parents.
Well, there's different rides. The Ferris wheel. They have the merry-go-round. They have a big slide. They have they have the sea dragon. They have various rides also for kids, for small kids, yes.
And when you have these busloads of kids and adults show up and they want to use the rides, what safety precautions do you have?
Well, we just got to make sure that the kids don't get hurt. We have regulations for that. We have personnel there guiding the kids and taking care of the kids so nobody gets hurt.
And the personnel specialize in the amusement park portion of Neverland, right?
That is correct, yes.
And are they in charge of maintaining the rides, making sure the machinery's okay?
That is correct, yes.
And were they under your supervision?
No.
Okay, who was supervising the people who run the amusement park?
Neverland has different groups of people, like departments, what we call it, and it was the person in charge of the amusement park.
Just like there's a group in charge of the petting zoo in the bigger zoo, right?
That is correct, yes.
And when these children and these adults visit Neverland, these different groups are all available to make sure kids are safe, right?
That is correct, yes.
Now, when you have hundreds of children running around Neverland, they can sometimes get into all kinds of mischievous situations, right?
Absolutely, yes.
You've seen kids caught in the house in various rooms, right?
That is correct.
And they've been politely asked to leave, right?
That is correct, yes.
You've seen kids trying to get indoors they're not supposed to get through, correct?
Correct.
You've seen kids trying to get into the arcade whenever they can, right?
That is correct, yes.
And kids are sometimes caught with things in their hands, little things they found in the main house and you have to take them away from them, right?
That is correct, yes.
And it's never been your understanding that Mr. Jackson is personally supervising all of this, right?
No.
In fact, he's amazingly generous in letting people come into his home and go through it, and see it, right?
Yes, he is.
And this is a large home that has a lot of beautiful antiques, correct?
That is correct, yes.
A lot of family pictures, right?
That is correct, yes.
He has things he's collected from all over the world, right?
Yes.
And he often lets whoever visits come through the house so they can see all of this, right?
Yes.
And when he has guests stay over in the guest quarters, I believe you said that they pretty much can walk into that main house when they want, right?
That is correct, yes.
He has staff available all the time to prepare a meal for them if they want one, right?
Yes.
And in that kitchen area, you have an unlocked refrigerator area, correct?
That's correct. It's open.
And they can go in there all the time and get sodas, right?
That is correct.
Juice, right?
Yes.
Milk?
Whatever their choice is.
And you'll find wine in there, right?
That is correct, yes.
And he lets his adult guests go in there and get wine when they choose, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And glasses are nearby if they want a glass, right?
Yes.
It's a very large refrigerator area, isn't it?
It is.
How many glass doors do you think are on that large refrigerated area?
Oh, God. About 6, 8, something like that.
6 or 8 transparent doors they can go into to get all kinds of beer, wine, soda, milk, orange juice, right?
That is correct, yes.
And there's a menu that's posted on a blackboard most days, right?
That is correct, yes.
And what do you typically find on that menu?
You find the menu for the food or whatever the people wants to use.
There's usually some special dishes that the staff are preparing for that day, right?
Exactly, yes, right.
And there also is a standard menu that Michael Jackson printed up that he gives that people have to order from, right?
That is correct, yes.
And you got sandwiches and soup and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
And on that bar area where people can come any time of day, you can sit there and just ask whoever is there to prepare eggs or an omelet, whatever you want, right?
That is correct, yes.
And there are homemade buns and donuts that are put on there every day, right?
Right.
Any time of day, 24 hours a day, you can go into that main house and get what you want, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Even when Mr. Jackson is upstairs with his children, very often people will come downstairs to either see the house or get something to eat, right?
That is correct, yes.
The prosecutor asked you about candy and ice cream and stuff like that. That's available to everybody, isn't it?
That is correct, yes.
It's not just available to children. It's available for adults as well, right?
That is correct, yes.
And when you walk into that theater, you've got a whole candy, ice cream area in the front, right?
Yes.
And typically, Mr. Jackson will have one of his people there just to serve whatever people want, right?
That is correct, yes.
Ice cream sandwiches, ice cream cones, right?
Whatever they prefer, yes.
There's a big popcorn area, correct?
Correct.
And you will see sometimes visitors looking at movies any time of day, right?
That is correct, yes.
And there's a huge collection of movies they can sometimes choose from, right?
Right.
And other times there are just a couple that you can choose for the day, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, there are other areas of Neverland people want to see, right?
Right.
There are areas where they can see Mr. Jackson's costumes that he's worn on music tours, right?
That is correct, yes.
There are areas where they can see his glove. Kids love to see the gloves he's worn, right?
That is correct, yes.
In fact, some of the memorabilia from his musical tours around the world are actually in an area not far from the wine cellar, correct?
That is correct, yes.
You also have sleeping bags stored down in the area near where the wine cellar is, correct?
That is correct.
Did you work there before Mr. Jackson purchased the property?
Yes, I did.
That wine cellar area was already there when Mr. Jackson purchased the property, right?
Yes, it was.
Now, there is a procedures manual at Neverland that, at least on paper, identifies what people are supposed to do or not do, right?
That is correct.
And security is a concern there, is it not?
Yes.
Because if you really look at the perimeter of Neverland, you can get in those fences, can't you?
Absolutely, yes.
In fact, it's easy for anyone to go in or out of those 3 rail fences anytime, right?
Absolutely.
And you've caught people on the property who tried to get over to Neverland and find Mr. Jackson, correct?
Many times.
And there are roads around the property where cars drive at high speeds, correct?
Yes.
And there is also a concern that children will somehow wander on the road, right?
That is correct, yes.
Let me get back to Janet Arvizo. Didn't she complain one time that she felt Frank and Vinny were separating her from Michael Jackson?
I don't recall her telling me that, no.
Did she complain that Dieter and Ronald were separating her from Michael Jackson?
Yes.
She appeared not to like Dieter or Ronald at all, right?
That is correct, yes.
When Janet and the children would arrive on the property, were they given assistance in transporting their luggage to their rooms?
Absolutely.
Who would help Janet transport her luggage to her rooms?
Many times it was security, Neverland Valley security, or myself.
And would Janet pretty much tell you what to carry from her car or however she got there?
No, not really.
Who would assign the rooms to the Arvizos when they visited and stayed at Neverland?
I did.
And what would determine, for you, what room to put them in?
It would depend. Many times we had some other guests on the property. And if we have one available, that was the only one that was going to be for them. And many times I asked them, okay, which room do you guys want to stay in? So that's how I decided.
Did anyone ever complain about the room that they were placed in?
No, not really.
Did the kids ever complain?
No.
The rooms they were placed in, as far as you're concerned, were all beautiful rooms, weren't they?
Yes, they are.
They were cleaned every day, correct?
That is correct.
And they had constant room service if they wanted it, right?
That is correct, yes.
Mr. Jackson wanted them treated just as well as any other guests, right?
Objection. Asked and answered.
Sustained.
How many times, Mr. Salas, has the prosecution contacted you to talk to you about the case?
A couple times.
And how many times did you meet with representatives of the sheriff's department?
A couple times.
They never asked you if you ever brought non-alcoholic beverages for the Arvizo children, did they? They never asked you that question, did they?
No, they didn't.
Now, I think you said that Michael Jackson appeared frustrated at what Frank was doing on the property from time to time, right?
That is correct, yes.
Objection. Misstates the evidence.
I don't think it does, Your Honor.
Overruled. The answer was, yes. Next question.
Michael Jackson was frustrated that Frank was bringing guests to Neverland without him knowing about it, right?
That is correct, yes.
And how old was Frank at the time, do you think?
I'm not sure how old was he. I will say he was about, 35?
Early 20s?
Somewhere around there, yes.
To your knowledge, how was Frank able to bring guests to the property without Michael Jackson knowing about it?
Objection. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
It was his own decision.
But what would Frank do, if you know, to bring guests onto the property without Michael Jackson knowing about it?
What he would do there?
Yes.
Just have fun at Neverland.
Oh, no, excuse me. I didn't state it properly. It's my mistake. If Frank wanted to bring guests onto the property without Michael Jackson knowing about it, what would he do?
He would just call security and let security know that he had some guests coming in, or tell me.
Would he typically tell them that Michael wants them visiting?
No, he never said that.
He just said he wanted them to visit, right?
That is correct.
Okay, and he would bring a number of female guests from time to time, correct?
Correct.
Objection. Relevance.
Overruled. The answer is, correct.
In fact, he tried to bring a lot of girls onto the property, didn't he?
That is correct.
He used to brag to them that he was a friend to Michael Jackson, right?
Objection. Hearsay. Relevance.
Sustained.
Now, you mentioned someone named Malnick visited the property one time, right?
Right.
Did you speak to him?
Not in a conversation, no, I didn't.
You just saw him?
Just saw him, say hi. And that was it.
The prosecutor mentioned someone named Zia, right?
That's correct. That is correct.
Did you see Zia on the property?
Yes, I did.
Did you talk to him?
Just for a short time. Not.
And Zia was, to your knowledge, Mr. Jackson's attorney, right?
Yes.
Did you see him there often?
No, I only saw him there a couple times.
And what did you see him doing?
Just had a meeting with Mr. Jackson.
Okay, you would see all kinds of people visit from time to time to meet with Mr. Jackson, right?
Yes.
Objection. Vague.
I'll rephrase. The prosecutor has limited his questions to you to Dieter, Ronald, Frank. Mr. Jackson didn't spend all of his time meeting with these people, did he?
Not all the time, no.
Mr. Jackson from time to time would have numerous visitors to Neverland to see him, correct?
That is correct.
Objection. Vague as to time.
Overruled. You may answer.
That is correct.
You would often see a full schedule of people visiting Neverland to see Mr. Jackson, right?
Objection. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
That is correct.
Do you recall Mr. Jackson doing work in his studio at Neverland?
Yes.
And what do you recall seeing him doing?
Doing some recording, dancing, practicing, yes.
Did you watch him practice dance?
No, I didn't.
And how did you know he was practicing dance? Would he tell you?
Right.
And would he tell you not to let anyone in, that he's doing his creative work?
Objection. Hearsay.
Overruled. You may answer.
Because of his work, yes, he did not want to be bothered, yes.
Did you also see him teaching kids how to dance from time to time?
I never saw that.
Okay, how about in his recording studio? Would he bring kids and adults into his recording studio to see it?
Yes, he did.
And didn't he used to show them how he does his work in his recording studio?
Yes.
And sometimes he wanted to just be left alone in there, right?
That is correct, yes.
And when he wanted to be left alone, he'd spend hours and hours in there, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, now, you would see Mr. Jackson awake on his property at all different hours, right?
Yes.
Sometimes he gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning, doesn't he?
That is correct, yes.
And he will take walks alone on his property, right?
That's right.
That's how he does a lot of his composing, right?
That is correct.
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
You'd also see Mr. Jackson from time to time driving alone on his property, right?
That is correct, yes.
Would you know in advance if Mr. Jackson was going to leave the property to go somewhere?
Yes.
And who would tell you that Mr. Jackson was leaving the property?
Sometimes I found out about, by his bodyguard.
Okay, and what are some of the other ways that you would find out Mr. Jackson might be either leaving the property or going out of town?
By Mr. Jackson.
Okay, did you speak to Mr. Jackson every day when he was there?
Pretty much, yes.
When he wasn't there, who would you speak to?
Objection. Ambiguous. Relevance.
Overruled.
When he wasn't there, well, nobody is, the ranch manager.
Let me ask you this. When Mr. Jackson's out of town, which you saw him do quite often during your 20 years there, right?
Right.
You saw him go on music tours, right?
That is correct.
And you saw him travel to various cities in America, right?
Yes.
And he would travel to various cities around the world, right?
Yes.
When he's not there, does the place pretty much run the way it runs when he's there?
It runs the same way.
And that's because there are various procedures in effect to make sure it runs properly, correct?
That is correct, yes.
When Mr. Jackson's there, he's not walking around the property just running everything, is he?
No.
In fact, very often when he's there, you hardly see him, right?
That is correct, yes.
Because Mr. Jackson is doing his creative work for hours and hours on end, right?
Correct.
So how does the place sort of run when he's not there? I mean, if you can explain it.
Because of the people in charge of running the place, so the place always running the same, so, whether he's there or not.
And even if he's there, you have to report to other individuals to get information, don't you?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so when the prosecutor asked you about your reporting directly to Michael Jackson, you didn't mean you're talking to him all day about what's going on.
No.
And if you report to him on a given day, it might be just one time, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, in response to the prosecutor's questions, you mentioned some things about Frank saying he'll take care of things, correct?
Correct, yes.
But Frank also used to brag about how close he was to Michael Jackson, didn't he?
Right.
You didn't get the impression he was always telling the truth, did you?
Objection. Calls for a conclusion.
Sustained.
You said, in response to the prosecutor's questions, that on occasion you would see Frank and Michael Jackson together, right?
Right.
But you also often saw Frank not around Mr. Jackson, correct?
Oh, yes.
And you often saw Mr. Jackson without Frank, right?
That is correct, yes.
And you didn't really know what work Frank was doing, correct?
That is correct, yes.
But from time to time, he would try and brag that he was in the music business, right?
Correct.
Objection. Hearsay.
Sustained.
I want to ask you a little more about security at Neverland, okay? It's about 2,800 acres of property, right?
Uh-huh.
Very spread out over hills, right?
Yes.
And it's surrounded by these fences that you said anybody could come in, right?
That is correct, yes.
You have a front gate that you have to stop at if you're driving in, right?
Correct.
And you have to push a button and identify who you are, right?
That is correct, yes.
And people at that security gate typically have a list of who's supposed to be allowed in, right?
Right.
And I think what you said is that Frank would often call the people at that gate and say, "Let so and so in," right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, now, you did indicate there had been efforts by people to drive and get onto the property and find Mr. Jackson, right?
Right.
And you have some security guards who patrol the property a bit, right?
Correct.
And they don't have weapons, right?
Not to my knowledge.
Because Michael Jackson doesn't want weapons on his property, right?
Correct.
Objection. Foundation. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Do you know whether or not Mr. Jackson has a policy that he doesn't want weapons on his property?
Yes, I do.
And he's typically very concerned about his children's safety, correct?
That is correct.
You said that Frank was staying in the video library, right?
Correct.
And was there a bed in there?
It's a couch that turns into a bed, yes.
Is that where he would stay when he visited?
Correct.
There were long periods of time Frank wasn't even there, right?
Objection as to, vague as to time.
Let's go to 2003. I'll rephrase it, Your Honor.
All right.
Let's take the year 2003. There were periods of time you wouldn't even see Frank on the property, right?
There was some times, yes.
And there are times you would also see him, correct?
Correct, yes.
There were times you would see Dieter on the property, right?
Correct.
And there were times you wouldn't see him at all, right?
Correct, yes.
There were times you'd see Ron on the property, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And there were times you wouldn't see him at all?
Right.
And during this period of time, you had your constant visitors on a daily basis to the property, correct?
Yes.
You had many other people who had scheduled meetings with Michael Jackson, right?
Right, yes.
And you also had your periodic tours of children and adults to Neverland, right?
That is correct, yes.
You indicated that you think that Mr. Jackson was at Neverland when the Arvizos visited in 2003, right?
Right.
You're not sure that he was there every day, though, are you?
That is right, yes.
If there were days he wasn't there when the Arvizos were there in 2003, you're just not sure, correct? That's a bad question. I don't think I could answer that one. In 2003, when the Arvizos were at Neverland, sometimes Michael Jackson was there and sometimes he wasn't, right?
That is correct. There was days that he was not there, yes.
There were times he was out of town, right?
Right.
There were times he was gone from the premises during the day, right?
That is correct, yes.
There were times he was in his studio, right?
That is correct, yes.
There were times he was doing his dance routines, correct?
Correct.
There were times he was taking children around Neverland on a tour, right?
Correct, yes.
And there would be constant meetings of one form or another involving Michael Jackson with other people, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, The prosecutor asked you about Michael Jackson playing with kids. Michael Jackson plays with kids all the time at Neverland, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
He often acts like a kid himself, doesn't he?
Yes.
And he takes pride particularly in bringing inner-city kids to Neverland to have fun, doesn't he?
Correct, yes.
We're talking about kids from poverty, kids from broken homes, right?
That is correct, yes.
He sometimes personally arranges those visits himself, doesn't he?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Do you know whether or not Michael Jackson sometimes personally arranges visits by kids to Neverland?
Yes.
And typically when these busloads of kids get to Neverland, they all want to see Michael Jackson, right?
Correct.
And sometimes you schedule all these kids and these adults to be at a certain location to wait for Michael to come out and see them, right?
That is correct.
All object is cumulative.
Overruled.
Isn't that true?
That is correct, yes.
And he would call you and arrange to have toys available for all these kids when they would visit, right?
Correct.
And you would typically have all the kids assemble on the property, and staff would start distributing toys to them, right?
That is correct, yes.
And very often in the middle of the toy distribution, Michael comes out to see the kids, right?
On some occasion, yes.
And you'll see them running to Michael. They want to see him. They want to touch him, right?
Correct.
The adults will do the same, correct?
Correct, yes.
Now, the prosecutor asked you what these children do at Neverland, and you talked about bike riding.
Yes.
What did you mean by bike riding?
He's got so many toys, they can just take off on the quad runners, scooters. That's what I meant.
And you never got the impression Michael Jackson was supervising the bike riding, did you?
No.
People on the property who worked for Mr. Jackson take care of that, don't they?
Especially security, yes.
And also you expect the parents or the adults in charge to have some responsibility, right?
Yes.
You talked about quads. Okay. And what did you mean by that?
They have those four-wheelers that they can go off the road. That's.
And they typically ride on the roads at Neverland, right?
Yes.
And who supervises that, typically?
Oh, themselves. Themselves are security.
You have never thought Michael Jackson was walking around supervising who got into those vehicles, did you?
No.
He doesn't seem to supervise any of that, does he?
No, he doesn't.
Okay. He assumes staff on the premises will, right?
Objection. Objection. No foundation as to what Mr. Jackson assumes. Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
You told the prosecutor that sometimes Michael Jackson would play with kids on a daily basis, right?
That is correct, yes.
And you would see him playing with kids all over the premises, right?
Objection. Asked and answered.
Sustained.
Did you see Michael Jackson take these kids to the petting zoo?
Yes.
Did you see him take them to the bigger zoo?
Yes.
Did you see him take them to the arcade?
Yes.
Did you see him take them to the theater?
Yes.
How about ride with them on the train?
Correct.
Okay. This went on all the time, didn't it?
That is correct, yes.
Now, the prosecutor asked you questions about Mr. Jackson appearing intoxicated, okay?
Right.
Now, you never saw him drinking, right?
No, I didn't.
And were you aware that there were times when he had a prescription drug problem?
Yes, I was.
And he had gotten a lot of injections from various physicians?
That is correct, yes.
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Did you know Michael Jackson had, excuse me, let me rephrase. Did you know whether or not Mr. Jackson at various times had a prescription drug problem?
Yes, I did.
And did you know he was treated for that?
Yes.
When you saw him appearing intoxicated, you don't know what the cause was, correct?
That is correct, yes.
You knew he had suffered severe burns on his body, didn't you?
Objection. Foundation. Relevance.
Foundation. Sustained.
Did you know whether or not, during one entertainment event, Mr. Jackson suffered severe burns all over his body?
I'll.
Yes.
Did you know he was being treated for that?
Objection. Vague as to time.
Sustained.
Did you know whether or not Mr. Jackson was being treated by physicians with medication because he'd been badly burned?
Objection. Vague as to time.
At any time?
Yes.
That was common knowledge at Neverland, was it not?
I'll object and move to strike the last answer. Still vague as to time.
Stricken.
During the year 2002, were you aware? Excuse me. During the year 2002, do you know whether or not Michael Jackson was being treated by various physicians for health problems?
Objection. Vague as to health problems.
Overruled. You may answer.
I'll object as to foundation.
The answer. The question calls for a yes or no answer. You may answer.
Yes.
And during the year 2002, were you aware that Mr. Jackson?
Objection to the form of the question. Were you aware assumes facts.
You have to let him finish the question.
During the year 2002, were you aware? Excuse me. During the year 2002, did you know whether or not Mr. Jackson was taking medications for a broken leg?
Yes.
During the year 2002, did you know whether or not Mr. Jackson was taking medications for a foot problem?
Yes.
And during the year 2002, did you know whether or not Mr. Jackson had recurring problems because he had been badly burned?
Yes.
During the year 2002, did you know whether or not Mr. Jackson had back problems?
Yes.
I'm going to object as to foundation.
Sustained.
During the year 2003, did you know whether or not Mr. Jackson was taking prescription drugs for a leg problem?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Do you know whether or not Mr. Jackson took prescription drugs in the year 2003 while you were working there?
Objection. Foundation.
Overruled.
Yes.
Do you recall seeing Mr. Jackson's children in his bedroom?
Yes.
They would be in there a lot during the time you worked there, right?
That is correct. Yes.
You would see his children at the lower level, right?
Correct.
You would see them in his bedroom upstairs, right?
Correct. Yes.
Did you typically spend much time with Mr. Jackson's children?
I would say I didn't spend too much time with them but saw them, every day there, yes.
Every day?
Yes.
And you would mainly see them in the main house?
Yes.
Would you see them on the property also?
Yes.
But you saw them in his room quite often, didn't you?
Yes.
Do you know anything about an alarm system that one has to use to get into Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
Objection. Vague as to one has to use an alarm system.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
And have you set off that alarm from time to time?
No, not really.
Have you heard the alarm go off?
No.
Okay. Do you know much about that alarm system?
I know about it, but didn't get involved in that too much.
It's not something that you would typically handle?
No.
Okay. Have you seen Mr. Jackson entertain adults at his home in the evening?
Oh, yes.
He does that quite often, doesn't he?
That is correct, yes.
And when he does that, you often see adults drinking alcohol, don't you?
Right.
You see staff serving them alcohol, right?
That's correct.
And they're free to go into the kitchen area and grab alcohol if they want to, typically, right?
That is correct, yes.
You've also seen them served alcohol in his bedroom, correct?
Correct.
You've seen adults sitting in the lower level of his bedroom drinking, right?
That is correct, yes.
And typically there would be an order placed by someone, and staff will bring alcohol into his bedroom for that purpose, right?
Right.
Okay, now, the prosecutor asked you about complaints involving kids in the wine cellar, right?
Right.
During the 20 years you worked at Neverland, that area you call the wine cellar was always a wine cellar, was it not?
That is correct, yes.
And this is the area that you said, close by, has an area which has Mr. Jackson's memorabilia from tours around the world, right?
Correct, yes.
And in that area nearby is where you can see his costumes, his gloves, and things of that sort, right?
That is correct, yes.
And typically kids and adults want to go there and see all these costumes from his very successful music career, right?
That is right, yes.
And once in a while, somebody will bring people down to that cellar area so they can see all that memorabilia, right?
Right.
Objection. Misstates the evidence that the memorabilia is in the cellar area.
That's what he testified to, Your Honor.
No, it's not. Rephrase your question.
Yes, sir. Let's take the area that we've identified as the wine cellar, okay? You got to go down the stairs to get there, right?
Right, yes.
When you get down those stairs, where do you see the wine cellar when you reach the foot of the stairs?
It's on the wall, placed on the wall.
There are other areas around the wine cellar which have other purposes in the house, right?
Right.
And doesn't one of those areas have costumes, gloves, and memorabilia from Mr. Jackson's tours?
Not specifically in that area.
Well, it's not far away, though, right?
It's outside there.
But you can certainly, from time to time, he has stored stuff there, hasn't he?
Yes, I would say that, yes.
And sometimes people have gone down to look at that stuff, right?
That is correct, yes.
And there's some other areas at Neverland where that stuff is stored as well, right?
The main part, yes.
Because there's a ton of stuff.
Yes.
From a long, successful career.
Yes.
Now, during the 20 years you've been at Neverland, there have been very few complaints about children being in the wine cellar, right?
That is correct.
You're talking about maybe a couple over a 20-year period, right?
That is correct. During my time there, yes.
Mr. Jackson's policy is not to let kids in the wine cellar, right?
That is correct, yes.
The prosecutor talked about young boys from Los Olivos, and you identified their pictures, right?
Right.
And you've seen them there with their parents from time to time, haven't you?
No, not with their parents.
The parents have visited?
Yes, yes.
But they also have come from time to time on their own, correct?
Themselves, yes.
And they've come from time to time when Mr. Jackson wasn't even there, right?
That is correct, yes.
And people on the property know them, correct?
Correct.
And generally nobody objects to their visiting Neverland, right?
That is correct, yes.
They sometimes come alone and they sometimes come with their parents, right?
Yes.
They're really neighbors, aren't they?
Yes.
And once in a while they've gotten into some trouble there, correct?
That is correct, yes.
They've been known as mischievous kids, right?
Right.
They've been caught in various places around Neverland, haven't they?
That is correct, yes.
They've been caught in rooms, true?
Correct.
They were caught playing hide and seek in the house, weren't they?
Right, yes.
Now, if you catch kids playing hide and seek in the house or getting into trouble, typically what do?
Well, you try to explain to them that, if you caught them doing something they're not supposed to be doing, you just let them know that, that's not what they should be. That there's some certain things that, they're allowed to do, there's things that they're not allowed to do, so we let them know.
But let's take these kids from Los Olivos that are neighbors who are allowed on the property, and sometimes their parents aren't there. Who kind of watches them when they come alone?
Pretty much nobody. They're on their own.
Do people on the property keep an eye on them, or what happens?
Well, I would say yes, security, just for safety reasons, yes. Or the staff personnel if they're at the amusement park, yes.
If they go into the main house, which they do from time to time, who would be in the main house typically, who might see them?
I would say that will be the maids, the cooks, yes. Or myself.
And if they start going upstairs into the bedrooms, who are they likely to run into?
Well, they'll run into the doors. They can't go in.
Besides the doors, who might they see? Will they see the people who are cleaning?
Yes, they might run into maids or somebody else from the house staff. Yes.
And how many kids are we talking about?
We're talking about the
3?
3 kids, yes.
Alright, and how long have they been coming onto the property, to your knowledge? Excuse me, let me rephrase that. When you were working there, for how long a period of time do you remember their coming freely on and off the property?
They would come in frequently.
Regularly?
Yes.
Would it be in the evening, morning, weekends? What would it be?
It would be weekends or days, yes.
And how would they get on? Would they go through the main gate?
Yes, they did.
And do people in the main gate know them?
Yes.
And do they typically just let them walk onto the property?
Yes.
Would somebody drive them anywhere?
Well, sometimes they drove to the place, so, yes, they drove their own car.
And how old were these young boys?
Young kids, 15, 16.
15, 16?
Yes, yes.
And they're the ones that got in trouble from time to time?
Right.
Alright, would anyone call their parents up typically and say, your teenage kids are in trouble?
Not my knowledge.
Okay, were they ever asked to leave the property, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
Actually, Mr. Jackson didn't want them to get in trouble with their parents, did he?
Objection. Calls for speculation. No foundation.
Sustained.
Let me ask you a few more questions about the Arvizos at Neverland. You saw the Arvizo children roaming freely around Neverland when they stayed there, correct?
Correct.
They'd use the amusement rides when they chose, correct?
That is correct.
They'd go into the theater when they wanted to, right?
Right.
They jumped on the train when they wanted to, right?
Correct.
And they would visit the zoo when they chose, right?
That is correct, yes.
Did you ever see the mother supervising the children at Neverland?
No.
Did you ever see her keeping an eye on the children at Neverland?
No.
When you saw them at the zoo, do you recall the mother ever being with them?
No.
When you saw the Arvizo children at the amusement park on the rides, did you ever see the mother with them?
No.
Objection. Cumulative.
Overruled.
No.
When you saw the Arvizo children on the train, did you ever see their mother with them?
No.
When you saw the Arvizo children in the theater, did you see the mother with them?
No.
But you saw the mother eating in the main house, didn't you?
That is correct, yes.
And you saw her walking around the property, right?
Right.
Would you describe the Arvizo children as mischievous?
At some point.
Well, they got in trouble at the amusement park, didn't they?
Yes.
Tell the jury what happened.
Objection. 403.
The objection is overruled. But we're going to take our break, so we'll start with that question when we come back.